Hi, everybody. We want to welcome you to another Fran Faith podcast. And I am so excited to have my good friend, Greg Surratt, here on today's episode. Greg, well, I'm going to ask Greg actually to go into his background a little bit, but Greg is a legendary pastor of a mega church and a founding pastor, and then he's actually transitioned to his son, actually, and so he's emeritus at Seacoast Church in Charleston, South Carolina. But Greg has just such an incredible background, and we'll talk a little bit about it today. But I just wanted to welcome you, Greg, and thank you for sharing some time with
Well,
all
thanks,
of us.
Todd. Always a pleasure to talk to you. It really is. And thanks for having me as a part of this adventure.
Yeah, thank you. So, Greg, I know you had been a pastor for many, many years, but it came a point in your journey where you came down to Charleston, South Carolina. And tell us a little bit about that story, because I think you started like a men's group, and if I'm not right, was it like a basketball group or a sports group or something that you originally started?
Well, I had been a pastor, I grew up in Denver, Colorado, went to small churches all my life. So I love small churches and I love small church pastors. And pastored a small church in northern Illinois. And it grew from about 13 members to about 300 or 400 members in a rural community. But it was from a very, very difficult time. It was the economy of the 1980s. And times were tough. It was real tough. We had interest rates to build were like 16%. So you think our interest rates are bad now? You can imagine that. And and unemployment was 25% in our county. And so we were poor, 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 poor. And we came to Charleston after 8 years there and came on staff with the church. And I thought, this is wonderful. There's a regular paycheck. It's a larger church. I like this. I really do. And I actually came, and the pastor had me lead a young adult ministry, is what it was. And I thought that would be great. I don't know if it went all that well. But after about 3 months, the pastor called me in and he said, you know what? You're a church planter, and there's a church in you, and we need to make that happen. And I'm like, I don't know that I want to do that. I like a steady paycheck is what I like. This is good. But he convinced me that really needed to plant a church, and they had a location in the Charleston area that they wanted to plant one. It's Mount Pleasant. And so we began to meet with a small group of people in Mount Pleasant, and we had about 55 people to start with, I think, which was pretty incredible.
Okay.
Then we launched, and that was if you want to talk from a business point of view, I didn't know there weren't a lot of models for that back in the day. Today, if you're a pastor, there are a lot of models out there. You can figure it out. Back then, there weren't a lot of models of launching churches. So I researched the best I could, and we launched Seacoast and have hung on for the ride since then.
Okay, yeah. So, and when when we've talked about it in the past, or I've heard you speak about it, I do remember you had started like a small group Bible study, and then you had maybe it was a softball
Yeah, softball team.
group, and started reaching out to other guys and had pulled them in, and were building relationships, and that's
Yeah.
how you started the church. So you did kind of create your own formula. That's why a lot of our audience is folks in franchising, and that's faith in franchising is our theme. And you clearly did have church planning in you to not only build what you build it from the start at Seacoast, but tell us a little bit about kind of the size and scale of what Seacoast has become, and
Yeah.
we'll start there.
Well, and you mentioned the softball team. I did. I met a guy who when I was pitching everybody on, let's start a church. And somebody said, well, you need to know Bobby. And so I went to meet Bobby, and Bobby had a softball team. And Bobby said, hey, do you want the church to have a softball team? I said, yeah. He said, well, you got one. And so I joined the softball team, and we won the city championship. They were good.
All
But
right.
we would reach guys off the softball team to come to church. That's one of the original things. We marketed, unlike church plants of that day. about 37 years ago. We marketed, there used to be a telephone in every house. You remember that? That was attached to the wall. They had phone books. And so we cut the phone book out and took every home in the area that we wanted to reach. And we called them for 6 weeks every night. I hired people to help me do that and asked them a couple of questions. Do you attend church? They said yes. We said, great, that's awesome. Keep going. End of conversation. And if you don't attend church, why do you think people don't attend church? And what if we were to create a church that addressed some of the issues that you're talking about? So that was our marketing deal.
Wow.
So we had 40 people the first week in a movie theater. I thought, oh my gosh, this is going to grow and grow and grow, and we're going to have a revival. We had a revival, but it's if you know the Bible, it's a Gideon revival where they had less people every week than they had the week before, and that's what we had. Seriously, for 5 years, we had declining growth. And so there was a lot of discouragement we had to plow through. We had to figure out who we were, and just formulate some things. And God began to bless it. And over the next few years, it grew, to within 7 years, 7 or 8 years, it grew to about 2,000 people. And then we had to figure out a multi-site because our town said that we couldn't build a bigger building where we were. And multi-site's kind of similar to franchising, I think. In fact, we've
Right.
been called by one of the newspapers here the best church McFranchise. And I don't think I don't know how positive that was, but we've won that award several times.
Well, all of our friends in franchising love franchising, so
Yeah.
it's a positive, Greg.
Yeah. Well, in your world, it's a positive. In the church world, I'm not sure they were. So, but we've been called that. So we began to duplicate what we do and learn to scale it. And what's interesting is I didn't even know how to spell scale. I didn't know what it meant. But God sent us Byron Davis, who was the retired CEO at Fisher Price Toys, and he scaled things in his sleep. And so I said, hey, you figure that out. I'll preach. I'll do all of that. And so we got some really, really exciting business guys who were involved in the early days of multi-site, figuring all of that out. So anyway, there was that. And then as that grew, we grew to 14 campuses currently here at Seacoast, and Seacoast has grown to be a church of, on an average week, we'll have maybe 25,000 people in all of the places, and then on big days it'll be 50,000 people, which is just unbelievable to me. And just incredible. I'm a small church guy, and
Yeah.
so that's kind of the Seacoast background and story.
Yeah. Okay. So you're like you and your team and everybody that was involved, including Byron, are like a large multi-unit, very successful franchise, if you will. You had a formula,
Hmm.
but you didn't just stop there. You and a few of your friends in the church world, I don't know, was it probably 20, a little over 20 years ago?
It's almost
You just,
25. Next year we'll celebrate 25 years.
okay. Tell us a little bit about that. You
Sure.
started the ARC. What is the ARC?
Yeah. About the same time, it was about 2001, when our city said we couldn't build a bigger building and we had to figure out multi-site. Multi-site's a deal now. It wasn't a deal then. And we had to kind of figure that out. And at the same time, I am a church planter. I get excited about church planting. And my wife says, we're not planting anymore. Okay. We're going to live here. And I felt like I, I had a God-inspired idea of planting 2,000 churches in my lifetime. And I shared it with a couple of buddies of mine. And a couple of them were kind of, God had planted an idea inside of them to plant a church. And so
Mm.
they were kind of excited about an experienced guy that was interested in investing in what they were doing. And so 6 of us, I believe, met together and said, let's formalize this. And so we formed the Association of Related Churches, ARC. And the first 2 churches we planted were 2 of the guys. Chris Hodges at Church of the Highlands in Birmingham, Alabama. That was our first church plant, along with his buddy, Rick Bezette, at New Life Church in the Little Rock area. And so on the first day, I think it was February something, 2002 maybe, I believe that's when it was, we planted our first churches. And what we did is Seacoast Church funded a good portion of their startup cost. And then we guaranteed their first year's income. I made a budget for them, said it would be about $150,000 for first year's income, and that's what you're going to need. And so we said, we'll chip in $12,500 a month. But you take offerings, and anything you don't get up to 12,500, we'll top it off. You understand what I'm saying? I didn't give them
Yep.
12.5. I said we will guarantee 12.5. And so both of those churches did really, really well. And then I said, here's what we'll do: is rather than paying us back, would you pay it forward so that we can plant more churches? And so we created a financial formula that when a church reached budget, and we'd help them set a budget, then they would take the funds that we had invested in them and pay it forward into a fund so that we can invest in churches in the future. And we are 25 years into it, just about. We're still using those same funds over and over and over again, just adding more to them. And we have planted almost 1,200 churches
Wow.
in that time. So
Yeah, that's so amazing. I understand the formula because it sounds like franchising. In fact, there's a piece of it that I love in that you formed an association of the related churches that they all participate together. And it's kind of like the franchisees, the church plants, if you will, because they're paying it forward, kind of participate in the franchisor, the
mm-hmm.
organization that's actually, starting new churches in new areas. So now you didn't do it under a brand name, if you will, right? But you did do it under a formula. As I recall in talking to you a little bit in the past, today, if a pastor will raise, if somebody is called to church planting, if they'll raise half of their own funds or their own salary, they have a little skin in the game, and then you guys provide the other half
Yeah.
plus their health care, and then you still do the budget and
Mm-hmm.
you still help them with all of that, as I recall. Help us understand that formula a little bit.
Yeah, what we do is if there's really a couple of two or three pieces to the process, we have a wide funnel at the top, and it starts on our website. And if you want to plant a church, I can't remember how many people every year hit that, but there's, let's say, 2,000 people be interested in knowing about that. And then we've got, some videos that you watch online that say, this is our values, this is who we are, does this fit with who you are? And then we'll meet with them in a kind of a round table. And we have several of those several times a year that are introductory process. And then if we're still taking the walk together, we think, then we'll go a little bit more in depth, and we measure 3 M's: money. How do they handle their money? Personal finances, how they do in their marriage. We want that to be strong, and so we have counselors talk to them about that. And then their ministry. Have they been successful at doing something in ministry? In other words, and back up just a second, our success rate is 93% of the churches that we plant are in business. When I say in business, they're churches that are growing 5 years later. And so that's what we measure. So we have a 93% success rate, which is
Okay.
really, really high. Well, there's one of the reasons for that is that we don't plant everybody. We're very selective about who we will do. And so we measure ministry, marriage, their personal finances. And then if we come out the end and we go, okay, we're going to do this, then we say your startup costs are going to be X. Let's say right now it's a couple of $100,000 to start a church, let's say, in a particular area. You do two things. You raise half of that. You raise $100,000, and you raise a core team of 40 people. We want to see the names, and we want to see the money in the bank. And then what we'll do is we'll match that, the money that you've raised, and we'll give you a coach. They've already come in contact with a coach probably, but we'll give you a coach, and we will coach you through what we call the play. It's like your franchise deal. We believe there are some best practices in planting a church, and we will coach you through those. We always tell them that everybody has a good idea. Why don't you hold on to your good idea for a couple of years and just run the play? And so that's how we do it. Now, we're not a denomination. We don't have any ecclesiastical authority over any of the churches that we plant. We're a network that is a relational network that believes in planting churches. And
Okay.
so that's what we do.
Yeah. Wow. And amazing formula and amazing track record, too. As I think about that, because you're listing that 93% as a cumulative number,
Mhm.
it'd be about 1% a year, if you will, turnover, if you will, that we
Sure.
measure in franchising.
Mhm.
And for a startup to go 5 years later, that's an incredibly high number, incredibly good number. So amazing. And you're being blessed by God. Clearly, God has been with you the whole journey and continues to grow. Have you ever looked at then how many members countrywide are in that 1,200?
Oh, wow.
Because I don't
On
know if
big
you have.
days, I know on big days there'll be close to 1 million people. Also, another number, and I should have it in front of me, but one of the things we do is as we teach churches to budget, part of that budget is 10%, at least bottom line, 10% needs to go toward missions, local
Yeah,
missions, national missions, foreign missions. And so our churches have given, my goodness, I wish I had the number in front of me, $70 million, something like that, toward missions. It may be bigger than that,
yeah,
over the time. So we're asking them to be a blessing in the communities that they're in and the parts of the
right.
world that they serve.
Yeah. Well, and we, as you know, we attend a ARC church down in
Mhm.
Sarasota with Randy Bizet, who's also involved, I think, with you and
Right.
Rick's brother, and so we've been very much blessed by that. So thank you for all of that and your faithfulness. So I know, Greg, you've always just been a wonderful businessman yourself in terms of building your church and building ARC and planting so many and budgeting through and you've given us great advice in business and so I've always appreciated that about you. I know you have a lot of business leaders in your church. And as we talk about businesses and our franchise businesses in particular, being the marketplace is kind of the Billy Graham called it the God's next greatest movement
Hmm.
is happening in the marketplace. And so, what advice would you have for bringing faith into your business or into your franchise business or as part of your culture? Or have you given, advice in the past, or what stories would you tell?
Yeah. You're in business to be in business. You're not a church. And most likely, everybody that you hire are not going to have the same values as far as spiritual values that you have. So, it's a little bit different. But the exciting thing is that if you are an owner or a leader, you can set the tone in a biblical way, whether or not you have the biblical words or the biblical buy-in. In fact, I know people and I have friends who have not fully jumped into the deep end of the pool on faith that would say, I follow Christ. In fact, well, I'll just leave it there. I've got some friends that are in other faiths that would say, I wouldn't call myself a Christian, but I'm a Christ follower because the principles that Jesus walked by, lived by, just makes sense. And now I believe that you need to take that next step and really become a believer and all of that. But in a business setting, the good news is that you as a franchisor or you as a leader, you can set the tone for where you're going and back it up just a little bit. How do you do that? Well, you make sure that you're following Jesus. You make sure that I believe, man, I've got a whole teaching on this and I'm not going to give it to you, but I believe that everybody's primary purpose in life is to extend the kingdom rule of God. Adam and Eve, he put them in the garden and he said, you're created in my image. We're all created in God's image. And so that you may rule. And that meant that they were to rule over the fish of the sea and the earth and all of that. But it was to bring the kingdom rule where there was chaos. And I believe, Todd, that you and I and every other business people, pastor, anybody, that the role that God wants us to play, regardless of what it is He wants us to bring the kingdom rule of God into every environment, whether that's a franchise, a school, a church. And what is the kingdom rule of God? It's love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, long suffering. It's the fruits of the Holy Spirit.
Yeah.
We bring peace. In fact, every environment that you walk into, whether that's a board meeting or whether that's a Starbucks, where you're getting your coffee, there ought to be a sense that there's something different about you because there's chaos in the world right now. Would you agree? There's
Oh, yeah.
chaos
Right.
everywhere. We can either add to that chaos and bring it into our business, or we can bring peace, we can bring love, we can bring joy, we can bring all of those things. And so it begins with an owner, a leader that says, you know what, I'm going to become passionate about following Jesus and allowing my life to be spirit filled and me to reflect the kingdom rule of God in my life. Does that make sense? I mean, that's just
Absolutely.
pretty simple stuff,
So
but it
it's
begins
it's
there.
it's the owner first setting the tone,
Hmm.
living the words of scripture just without chapter and verse.
Hmm.
You don't have to wear chapter and verse on your sleeve, but if you're living out your faith, which means you do need to be in the word on a regular basis. You do need to be interfacing with others on a regular basis, talking faith. And so just like the Bible says, iron sharpens iron, and so we strengthen each other. And then if you set that tone in your business, you are bringing peace and making order out of chaos and helping people in their lives. I
You know,
kind of
by the
look
way,
at it,
that's one of the reasons I'm excited about what you're doing here is that I think are creating an environment where people who want to do that can talk about it. I believe everybody needs a band of brothers or a band of sisters. I say it like this, everybody needs to sit at least one table with a group of people who love you but are not impressed with you and can tell you the truth and cheer you on.
yeah.
And that's that small group of people that are doing the same thing, and we can encourage one another and just live it out in the community. That's one of the
Yeah.
ways that you can bring it into the community.
Well, and one of the thoughts behind the faith in franchising movement is that the franchise folks oftentimes like to flock together anyway.
Hmm.
It can be lonely running your own business. You're in a system where you know other people, and so naturally you're kind of following a system. You might get to know those people, but it's important to kind of see each other in a faith context and build upon that because you're kind of the shepherd
Hmm.
for your own little flock
You
in
are.
your own little franchise
Mm.
units. And so you're going to be that anyway. And so if you can match that with what you had shared, that you're kind of walking and living out those values, it's just a great way to lead your people.
You know, Todd, and I think culture is so very important. When we started Seacoast, I didn't know how to spell culture. You know, I had vision, 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 vision. Somebody says that culture eats vision for breakfast. Maybe
Yeah.
so, maybe not. I don't know. But it's so important. And that's one area, that's another area you can really bring your faith-based values into your culture. At Seacoast Church, we have 4 cultural values that every employee they're not values, they're responsibilities. That's what they are. 4 cultural responsibilities. If I'm going to work here, I've got to embrace these responsibilities. And here they are. Because I think most of them will work in a business environment. Number one, love God. Well, maybe you don't put that in there. Okay, maybe you have 3, whatever. But for us, it starts there. You've got to have that. Secondly, treat people right. Treat people right. And it's not rocket science. Jesus said, love your neighbor as yourself. And that wasn't even original with him. It was a saying of the time, but it's how he lived. And in a business or any kind of relationship, I want to be treated with integrity. I want to, even in hard conversations, I don't want to be ghosted. I want to treat others like I treat myself. And you put that in your HR,
Right.
and then you live that out as a value. And then, so love God, love others, or treat others right, and then get better. That's one of our values that we want to be a learning organization. We want to get better. We ask our employees to have at least 3 people in their life, and we want to know who they are, that are doing a similar thing, but they're just doing it better or they're further along. And what we want you to do, we want you to develop a relationship there, go to conferences together, communicate so that we can learn and we want to get better, best practices all the time. And then the fourth one is I have a responsibility to maintain a good attitude. It's rough sometimes. It's
Yeah.
rough for everybody, but I have a responsibility. And we use the old, we are thermostats, not thermometers. A thermometer measures the temperature around you, and that's how your attitude is. And a thermostat sets the temperature in the room. And I have a
Yep.
responsibility to do that. So we use those for employee evaluations, everything, but
Yeah.
creating a culture that would be a culture that, I think Jesus would be comfortable with.
Yeah. Well, and I think that's wonderful. And even your first one, honor God, is it's hard for a lot of folks, I think, to deny and honoring God. If you honor something that is bigger than yourself, I find a lot of times when people are hurting, even in a company setting or in our company, I say, is it okay if I pray with you? Well, even if they haven't prayed before, a lot of people accept prayer and
Hmm.
they'll accept it in a time of hurt. And so we do that all the time. That's one, God honoring. But I've rarely, rarely ever had anyone deny that.
Hmm.
Even if somebody, maybe they're an atheist, oftentimes somebody might think, oh, I'm an atheist, but they're really probably agnostic. They're
Hmm.
not denying that God exists. They're just saying, hey, I just don't know him. I don't have a relationship with him right now. Well, a great way in business to open that up and just say, hey, can I pray with you? I don't know that I can think of a single time where I actually ever had anyone say no.
No,
Uh,
everybody wants help.
Everybody wants help and they
Hmm.
love it that you care and that you care about them and that you're a person that honors God first. And
Hmm.
it's fully legal in the United States to do that and to praise God that we can do that in our businesses. And so yeah, I love those values. You just laid out four values that anybody can implement immediately in their franchise business
Yeah.
and build culture. So, well, Greg, is there anything that I maybe haven't asked you or that you've got going on today? I know you have a lot of projects. We're working together on the
Yeah.
Pastors Collective and your love for pastors and giving a retreat center. Maybe talk to us a little bit about that or if there's
Sure.
anything else I've missed.
Yeah, one of the things I noticed a few years ago is that we were doing a great job at planting churches, but there was an incredible mental health strain on the church planters, and this was before COVID. And when COVID hit, among pastors it was devastating. Just trying to negotiate through all of that, and we saw a big burnout rate in churches as a whole for pastors. In fact, at one point there was like 42% of
Mm.
pastors self-identified as burnout, thought about quitting in the past year. Now they're all not going to quit, but what if half of them did? How does that impact communities and families and even our nation? And so I was looking around for something to do. Everything else is running, pretty well. I said, I'm going to attack that. And so we have created a retreat center. We've done it with retreats and resources and relationships. Those are kind of three things that we think are important. And so we've created a retreat center in Charleston where we bring in about 16 pastors at a time for 3 days, and they get a big dose of rest, relaxation, and relationships. So out of that, guys who and girls who feel lonely, I feel like can connect with a band of brothers or a band of sisters and take a lifetime journey there. And then we have begun to develop resources that help build resilience, over the long haul. And so that's what we're doing. We've had a couple thousand pastors and leaders who have been through in the last 4 years. So we're excited about it.
Well, it's inspirational here again to watch your work there and what you're bringing to so many of these pastors and churches and changing lives and marriages. I mean, pastors like anyone else struggle in
Hmm.
marriages, and I know you guys work on a lot of that. There's another connection, I guess, to franchising in that I think, as I recall, Chick-fil-A, that company and that family has helped in
Yeah,
the pastor's aftercare and
yeah.
paying for that and contributing to that. And I thought that was such a blessing.
Yeah, Chick-fil-A has been so generous in helping with, like you said, aftercare. They're concerned about the mental health of pastors, and they've helped us to some degree, and so it's been great.
Yeah, that's so exciting. So, well, Greg, thank you so much for spending time with us and for sharing a little bit on culture and growth. And it's just funny when I think of the number one pastor in franchising who knows multi-unit and who knows growth and has built over 1,000 units in the church plants, I think of Greg Surratt.
Oh
And
boy,
so,
well,
brother, I
thank
love
you.
you and I appreciate you so much. And thanks for sharing with our group today.
My privilege, Todd.